So welcome everyone. It's 8:30 and I don't want to keep our panelists on the benches too much longer, but I wanted to welcome you to this career coffee. My name's Eva Kaiser and I will be the moderator today. This career coffee is on bridging the generational divide, navigating an intergenerational workforce. For me, it's kind of a special topic because not only do I have kids that are younger who I need to be able to communicate with, I also teach at the University of Minnesota as an adjunct. So I'm kind of dealing with all kinds of different generations at the same time. Plus, then I also consult with clients and everything else. So I'm always crossing that intergenerational divide. Today we have Gen Xers, we have Millennials, we have Boomers, and we have others speaking. So we'll have lots of great input. So our speakers today, Jill Speakerman Bonham, APR, raise your hand, Jill. Jill is currently with Land O'Lakes, but I think I can say she's going to be going to the University of Minnesota shortly. We have Muna Mohammed. She's a strategist, and she just graduated from the University of Minnesota. So you got the spectrum there. We have Alan Newbold. He's from Carmichael Lynch Relate. He's our boomer for today, along with Jill. We've got Rachel Elke, who is at Curious Plot. She's also a former U of M person, so we're gonna kind of bring all the U of M's in here. And then we have Katie Volney, who's at Broadhead. And then there's me. So what we're gonna do for kind of the housekeeping notes, is this is being recorded. We're gonna have some questions at the beginning, and then we're gonna open it up for questions at the end. If you want to share your questions through the chat, please do so. If not, we'll call you in at the end after 30 minutes to have the conversation. It's really important for this career coffee to be interactive. So we're gonna have some back and forth, and we will be asking you to engage after we get through kind of our beginning questions. With that, I'd like each of the panelists, starting with Jill, to share a little bit about themselves, where you are in the spectrum, but also what you're doing now in your organization. So Jill.
Okay, I'm a boomer and I'm doing sales communications for the Purina division within Land Lakes. I'm transitioning in a couple of weeks to teach at University of Minnesota. I have taught before, so I've always kind of through my whole career been the person who is in charge of the interns or mentoring or working with younger professionals. I love that. I love teaching and interacting with young people. Gosh, through my whole career, I don't want to go through the whole thing because that would take like the whole webinar, but I've been like editor, agency 3 times, client several times as well. So I've worn many hats along the way, but that's kind of me in a nutshell. Thanks.
Okay, Muna.
Hi everyone, my name is Muna. I am a recent graduate from the University of Minnesota. I majored in strategic communication. I explained this earlier. I am in the middle between Gen Z and millennials. I have friends that are Gen Z, and then I grew up at an early age with millennials. So I do have that both kind of side, I would say. Currently, I am one of the directors for the Student Ad Summit that's going to be next year with the Ad Fed Minnesota. I'm really excited for this workshop and just be able to talk to everyone and connect.
Great, thank you. Alan?
Good morning. I'm Alan Newbold at Carmichael Lynch Relate. I'm actually a Boomerang employee here. So I was here when I was a senior account executive, and now I'm here as an executive vice president. So it's kind of fun to see how things shift during that time as well. Also, anybody who knows me knows I hate to talk about age. So this is me coming out as a boomer cusper. So that's, going to be a surprise to people. So that's also something interesting to acknowledge as we're having this discussion. Interestingly, I started my career in my late 30s, early 40s in PR. And so I immediately started as a very entry-level employee reporting to people who were 15 and 20 years younger than me. So now it's come full circle where now I am, in a position where I'm actually leading teams of people who, yes, maybe 20 or 40 years younger than me. So it's a really interesting spectrum. I'm focusing over here on the food and beverage practice. And so interestingly enough, also, as we're thinking about that, I think we're going to need to be talking about generational audiences as well, because what you're seeing here, this combination is exactly the combinations of people we're trying to reach at any given moment.
Thank you. Rachel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel. I work at Curious Plot, live and work in Minneapolis, primarily right now working with Land O'Lakes clients. I fall in between Gen Z and Millennial. I have written, there's a term called Zillennial. It's a mashup of the two. I'd be the youngest Millennial on the board and the oldest Gen Zer. So I have things that I relate to with both audiences. Right now, I spend a lot of my time working with clients who are, I mean, both older than me and the same age as me. And obviously, when I was entry level, I'm at an agency now, and I was previously corporate. Spent a lot, exclusively all my time working with people older than me, and even a lot of leadership. So I have some leadership knowledge to share later. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Last but not least, Katie, welcome.
Hello, I'm Katie. I am at Broadhead. I am one of our public relations directors here, so mainly overseeing our CPG practice. I am smack dab in the middle of Millennial, so got that kind of interesting dynamic, but obviously as a psych nerd and a comms person, this topic is fascinating to me, and so I'm excited to dive in with everyone.
Thank you. So I'm already going to skip through our questions, and I'm going to go to the one about misunderstandings. Misunderstandings often arise between generations based on assumptions and stereotypes. What advice do you provide us with how to have open conversations and empathy to improve the dynamics of a workforce? And I think I'm gonna start with you, Alan, since you're the one who's got all the different generations under you.
I think that it's an interesting question, and I've learned that life experience is just that. It's life experience. So whether you've had 2 years of it, 10 years of it, 30 or 60 years of it, it's still your life experience that you're bringing with you to you and your team. So, and to your clients and to your agency. But I think I think it's interesting to say, let's look across generations rather than up and down generations. And I think changing the vision from vertical to horizontal is something that's going to be interesting. And so don't think about life experience, but think about passion, think about talent. And remember that, all the audiences, as I said earlier, that we're trying to reach are just the same. So looking at it from that perspective and knowing that collective approach is going to be advantageous, whether it's for a client, a company, or a team.
Okay, thank you. So you'd mentioned during a previous conversation we had about reverse generational biases as well, that you're usually the oldest person on a webinar, on a call, and you're usually the
We
old
don't
white
say
man.
that out loud, Ava. Please, we do not say that out loud.
Yeah.
And how that also causes some assumptions that way as
Yep.
well.
I think it does. I think also, come on, there's a little bit of an inherent surprise when you find out that the person you're working with on a tween program, in gaming is actually your grandpa's age. And so you have to be willing to set that aside and say, oh, but this is him right now. And God, why does he or she know that? Right. So I think that it's just interesting to step away from that. And I too have to step away from, come on, you have 1 year in the industry, right? So it's really hard. You have to push all that aside and say, yes, you have 1 year in the industry, and God, you were hired because you are amazing, and I can't wait to hear and see what you bring to the table, right? So I think you have to do that at all levels, and you have to be willing to say, yeah, I may have messed up that one, or, okay, thank you for bringing me back in. Thank you for reining me in. Thank you for calling me out. So it really comes down to those communications and being willing to be kind of vulnerable in the moment and accepting, where things are coming from, and know that it's always coming from positive intent. It has to.
Thank you. So I'm gonna call on Katie here. The secret is that Katie used to work for Alan, so we get the inside scoop here. So anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, even in our prep conversation, Alan, how you brought up, obviously in the before times that we were mainly, working in person and, you have communication style challenges that way. But when you add in, the virtual element, that can be, cause even more miscommunications or misfires or opportunities for interpreting something in a way that it was not intended. And so that's, I think, another element that comes into it. I think with Alan and I, right from the jump, we just had a very open line of communication and, we were very transparent with one another when, a miscommunication arose or, we encountered a difference in our, approach to something. And so I think really where all of this starts is, having that transparency and willing to be vulnerable and, communicate your needs or things that bothered you. Even if it might be uncomfortable, because that'll ultimately help you grow.
Yeah, Eva,
Great.
can I jump in on
Go
this?
ahead.
I think it has a lot to do with active listening and really listening and paying attention to the people that you're talking to and always assuming positive intent, right? When there's a misunderstanding, when I've experienced it, it was always, well, not always, but quite frequently because I assumed something that I shouldn't have. And especially, it's interesting that you bring up virtual, Katie, because like it's easy to read something into an email. What do they mean by that? What were they thinking? And if you assume positive intent, then you'll stop questioning, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble because of that, and think, oh, well, they're just asking a question, so I need to answer that question and not think anything more of that. But I think if we always remember that we just want to treat people with trust and respect. And if we treat people with trust and respect and assume positive intent, a lot of the misunderstandings will go away, no matter what the generations are.
Muna or Rachel, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I was gonna piggyback an anecdote I had that tied really closely into what you were saying, Alan. I spent this summer mentoring our interns at Curious Plot. There were 8 of them total, and last week or 2 weeks ago, we brought them to meet Heather Melanchek, the CMO of Land O'Lakes, to get advice from her. I mean, the biggest age gap you can probably get there. She made many age jokes, and they were very funny. But one of her biggest points was that you younger people are here because we appreciate and want your ideas, and there's a like you're smart enough, there's a reason you got this internship. And a lot of times when you do bring your ideas to the table with people who are older, like her, Heather was saying, or like you, we honestly may not have even thought of that. You might think that we have because we've been around like the block for so long, but just different perspectives and life experiences, like you said, even if they're like 2 years, what they're doing in their 2 years is so different than what like we've all been doing, and vice versa. So I just thought it was really valuable advice for them, and goes for all of us, that your ideas are valid and
I think
worth
that's a really interesting point. Exactly, Rachel, when you talk about those 2 years as an entry-level employee coming out of college, were so different, than what it was for somebody else. And that's what gets exciting. I mean, if you remember that, and it's like, I'm never going to have that experience ever. There's no way I can't go back in time and change it. So I need that from the people that are on the team to bring me into that world. And that's kind of fun too. And then I'll tell you what it's like walking to school with no shoes on in the snow, and we'll have fun. So.
Well, one of the things that we also jumped into during our conversation, we just mentioned life experience. And I want to tag Muna here because she talked about not only life experience, but also cultural experiences as well, and how that makes a difference in the communication styles as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a question that I think everyone should ask themselves. I think, we're at a time where I feel like technology has a big factor in it. And I think just being able to look at it in a different perspective is definitely helpful. I think, looking back in time, I think there are people that, you know, come in entry level or intern are very young. So this is not something that's new. I think now it's just these assumptions that we do have. But I do believe understanding it from a culture aspect, as in like seeing what makes everyone different and unique, is definitely something to look into. And it helps a lot. I think there's nothing bad with connecting, I think, or just understanding what this person might have gone through. Like again, looking back into that, we definitely need that trust and that respect. I think those are big things that everyone should set in the beginning.
Does anyone want to add to that? Profound?
Yeah, I mean, I
statement?
think it's interesting too. I mean, we're talking about age now, talking about culture, you know, all the different mitigating factors at play. So we're all that tiny, you know, pinprick in between, you know, all of the different intersections of our identities, whether it's, you know, socioeconomic background or sexuality, gender, we're all bringing that with us beyond just age. And the confluence of all of those things are what makes us, you know, communicate in a certain way and interpret things in a certain way. And so understanding that, you know, people have much different experiences than you do, and you know, really having an open mind to learn more and broaden your perspectives.
I think to piggyback on that, talking about that confluence as well, is that people come to work for different things now. Yes, it's always been about a salary, but it's always been about a passion, right? I mean, we got to work to live, right? So that's just life. But intergenerationally, people get more out of work depending on where they are in their lives and what they need from it. And I think that gets down to work-life balance and cultural crossover and all of that. And also, again, it is work, it is business. So we have to deliver something at the end of the day. And so making sure that what we're invested in is delivering the work and the relationships that get us there, but also not being afraid to, you know, set those boundaries, understand what works for some, what may not work for others, owning the communication to make sure that's being delivered, and just remembering that positive intent at all points, as so many of those pressures outside of the office are just on the table at work. And that's what we all work through and deal with. And we have to be compassionate and do that carefully sometimes.
But the difference is what makes it cool, right? Like some of the neatest people I've met in my career were very, very different from me. And I learned a lot from them. And that might have to do with age. That might have to do with their background. It might have to do with lots of factors. But that's what makes the work awesome, is many people with very different perspectives coming together on a project. And that I would think of is, when I look at my whole career of PR, some of the coolest things have been when I met someone that was very, very different from me and learned a lot from them. So yeah, it's that always having that trust and respect at heart and going into it with an open mind and an open heart.
So since communication styles vary among the generations in some way, I mean, I can remember someone coming here, their first internship, they were faxing information. Now we're texting and then email and, you know, Zoom and everything else. The styles vary among generations. I mean, I know that my sons will never listen to a voicemail. Like that's the voicemail's out. And I text like an old lady, they said, so that's fine because I use punctuation in my text messages. But what strategies have you found that help enhance communication to be sure it's effective across the workforce? I mean, I think Jill, you mentioned that when you communicate to your constituents, you're using everything.
I am, and I also mentioned a book, and it's a book written by Shari Harley, and it's called How to Say Anything to Anyone, and it has a whole list of questions in it. So when you get a new manager, when you get a new client, it's the list of questions that you go through that says, how do you want to be communicated to? When should I call? When should I text? When should I email? How much email do you get? How do I know how to break through the clutter? And also the shouldn't questions. When shouldn't I text? When shouldn't I call? And what are the boundaries? Because everybody needs off time as well too. But yeah, in my sales communications job, I'm working with people that are right out of college to people who have been in the business for 40 years. And we use podcasts, we use blogs, we use plain old everyday newsletters and all kinds of things to get to them. I laugh, I saw in the comments, Emily Cheney put in here that she was faxing news releases at her first internship. Yeah, I remember having a fax machine. It's totally changed since then. You know, and so you just have to make sure that you have a mix that communicates those messages to your audiences to meet them where they are.
Alan, you and I had a lot of practice with this too. I know Alan loves a voicemail. I'm like, Alan, I hate voicemails. Like, please, I know you don't want to type it, but so he started leaving me voice notes, which for some reason, even though they're like the same thing, for me, I like better. And so I think it's having the, strength and courage to communicate some of those things just helps everyone in the long run.
Noted. I'm good at a voicemail, Katie.
You do leave excellent voicemails.
But yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. In fact, I was laughing with another colleague that I think we are the only two people left in the world that use voicemail. So we use it specifically with each other. I think also everybody who knows me also knows that I'm a huge proponent of you own 50% of every relationship you're in. It's your responsibility. You own 50% of that. And so you need to, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's with a client, whatever, you own 50%. So it's your responsibility to make sure that the other party understands exactly how you like to be communicated with, when, styles, etc. But then also it's you also own the responsibility to understand how to flex to them. So if you've got a client who, says, hey, text is personal for me, I don't care how important it is, don't use my text. You need to respect that, etc. And, if you've got somebody who loves bullet points, but you love to spell it out, you're going to have to learn how to bullet point, and vice versa. If you love bullet points, but somebody wants detail, you're going to have to go, oh my God, I have to punctuate and really blow this out. But you own that 50%. And if you own it truly, you'll be fine. And that's when, again, you just kind of have to take those risks and figure it out. And in the end, it's business, and that's what we do to succeed.
So that makes me think about asking Rachel a question here.
Yeah.
So you had 8 interns right out of college in a professional area working with, within an agency and within clients. What rules did you have to set out to them, or how did you communicate what's acceptable and what's not?
Yeah. Definitely just the concept of, I wonder if any of them are on here right now. Let me just check. Just kidding. I wouldn't care if they are. We were good friends, but just like professional etiquette, you develop that as you go in your career, and like how casual you can be in communications. Maybe obviously you can be more casual in Slack with each other than you would be on like emails where you're sending over stuff for our client to review. So that was definitely something that was improved on from the start to the end of the summer. And another thing that I was just going to mention within this conversation is like the urgency of things. It's easy to feel like everything's urgent all the time in our industry, at least especially at an agency, because you're serving clients. So just like give people time to respond, because we're more reachable now than we've literally ever been in this like the life we're in post-pandemic. Of like, I can text you, I can Teams chat you, I can Slack you, we will have a meeting, I'll call you, I'll see you at the office. It's like, it never ends. So just give people some space. And we also talked a lot about like time management and when you expect to, like, if I have a question for you, can you get back to me at the end of the day tomorrow kind of thing. Put that in your request, even if it's really simple, just a question. Because the requests and the Slack pings and emails start to add up, and it gets overwhelming. So it would be those two things.
Okay. So Muna, you're reaching out now. What are some of the ways you like to communicate? because you're the people who are we're bringing into the workforce now.
Yeah, I mean, everyone said it. Like, I think for me, it's definitely ask. I like to have people, just ask me what my preference is, like what. And I think sometimes you expect that and sometimes you don't get that. So I think working around it, trying to figure out what works best for you and puts you at your best, and just being able to establish that relationship with whoever you're working with, if of course and professionally, and try to understand what works for them as well, and trying to find a balance in between that if you can. If it's not the place for you, then at least and you learn.
Thank you.
Mm.
So one of the things you mentioned, you've got all this communication all the time hitting at you, and there's the concept of work-life balance. And when do you break from work? When does your rest of your life start? Because you can be having your phone next to you at all times.
Mhm.
And the concept of work-life balance has evolved over time. We no longer have to be chained to a desk with a desktop monitor and a fax machine next to us. We can be working anywhere on any kind of device. How can generations find common ground and respect others' way of working and respect their work-life balance? What have you found to be the good mix? I guess I'll start with you, Jill, since you travel so much and you had the constant phone, you said.
Yeah, well, I travel a lot and I'm in lots of different time zones too. So one of the things that you set boundaries for yourself, and you have to set boundaries for yourself. Like I use do not disturb on my phone. I make my phone sleep in a different room so it's not next to my head. Okay, I'm not agency, right? So I can do that. But you got to set boundaries for yourself that allow you to get sleep and have a normal life, because we can't be always on. We have to have time when we're off, when we relax, when we disconnect, when we tune out, to enable to keep the creativity that we need to have in this business. And that's not easy when you're young. To come to that point where you can say, I can turn it off and whatever happens there will be okay until the morning. But again, going back to asking those questions, that's when you get a new manager. How can I set those boundaries? What's acceptable? Most teams have, a 24-hour response is acceptable, 48-hour response acceptable. Don't email on the weekends. They have rules kind of that you revolve around because you have to have your off time.
Yeah, and I think this is the work-life balance concept. I think is one of the biggest ways I think that generational differences can show up, and just kind of where you're at in your life. So, if you're a working parent, maybe you're leaving work a bit early, but then once the kids are to bed, you're firing off a few emails, and someone who's younger or hasn't worked with that person for a while may think, oh my gosh, all of this is urgent that they're sending to me at 9. I'm so stressed, I have to respond. But understanding and communicating with them of, that's my time where, I'm enjoying myself and having that time away from the office. If there is something urgent, how would you communicate that to me, so that I don't have to be, responding to everything at that time?
I will chime in there as well, because I'm awful at it. So I will take this moment to apologize to everybody. I have to get things out of my head. And I typically do pretty well with using, delayed sends. Okay, I'm getting better at it, even in Teams, et cetera. But I'm out shopping on the weekend and I see client stuff and I'm like taking photos and I'm sharing it and that kind of stuff, and realizing that that's how my mind works and that's how I share information and I get it, not realizing that somebody else may actually be at a family wedding and they don't need Alan's text of a new product dinging while somebody's walking down the aisle. So for me, remembering that, Alan, your brain works different than everybody else's, make sure you're respecting that, is really important from my personal experience, which I'm always trying to get better at. But I think also it is more about respect than common ground, right? I mean, literally, you have to be willing to understand and respect everybody else needs to set their own boundaries and they live by them and breathe by them. And I actually commend them for that. I'm horrible at boundaries, and I wish I could get better. So that's what I'm trying to learn from a younger generation as well. But I think also when it comes to those expectations, as Katie was just calling out of, when can I text, when can I not text? And Jill was saying, what do I need to make things private? When you're also very clear about the parameters of everyone's role, right? So when you're very clear on what your role is within the organization, within the team, then it's easier for everybody to succeed as well. So I think that's equal parts of this work-life balance, is very clear communications, expectations on what roles are and how they play within the broad organization and the individual team. Then that also makes it easier as well from respecting boundaries and understanding what is happening and what the expectations are at any given moment.
Anything you'd like to add, anyone?
I love that. I honestly feel like, that is amazing, Alan, that you see it from that. I think at the end of the day, like, it is finding a right team. And I think that's where it always starts with the hiring process, hire with purpose. I think because when you're hiring that person, it's affecting or helping so many other people. So being able to see what works for each team is definitely very important. And I think, people, we go to school with people, professors that are not the same age. We see that, we deal with that. And I think in Minnesota, of course, that's what it is. Of course, throughout the country, it might be different. So I think now what's really amazing with Zoom is you get to hire across the country. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And I think in this industry, people prefer to be in person. They love to be around that. And some people, doesn't matter what age they are, might also prefer Zoom. So I think it's definitely finding that balance and what works for you.
Thank you. So one of the things that we just, when we had our prep call, we just all jumped on was the idea of mentoring. And mentoring has changed and it's evolved, and people expect different things out of mentoring, but there's also the reverse mentoring. And I wanted to kind of talk about how mentoring works now in an intergenerational aspect. That's not probably the right phrase it, but can you share some examples of the reverse mentoring and the regular mentoring that's helped you throughout your careers? And I know, Jill, you've got the example I wanted to jump into first.
Yeah, we have a formal reverse mentoring program within the Land O'Lakes, and this is the third year that I've been part of it. And I have someone from our employee resource group, Young Professionals Network, that is my mentor. And it's been phenomenal for me to work with someone in that type of relationship. Obviously, in my stated career, I mentor lots of other people. But in this particular program, they mentor me, which is a great learning opportunity for me to learn where they come from and to teach me to be a better communicator to younger people. And I can't recommend it enough.
I actually had this in my notes as well. The reverse mentoring idea. One of my favorite scenarios that I've been a part of so far was not like a formal pairing of any kind. And the two women, they just so happen to be like, they're probably nearing retirement. And I love them so much. And I think that they would say the same about me. I worked for them back in college, and so we still stay in touch, and we'll like go on walks around the lakes and stuff. And I had written, not even knowing this is where you were taking this question, is that it is a two-way street. Like if you're going to be the mentee and you're going to half-ass it, like that's just a waste of everyone's time. They don't want to do it, and obviously I don't if I'm not that interested. But I was always just so interested in what they had to say that we would end up talking for like a full afternoon and just like swapping stories back and forth. So I'd like to think that they learned just as much from me as I did from them. So the mentorship does make it seem, the term itself, as if it's a one-way street, but it's really not. So if you want to be successful, that's what I'd say, is give as much effort as they are to you.
Yeah, Emily put the link in for the PRSA Career Mentorship Program in the chat. So yeah, love that program. And if you're interested in finding a mentor, that's a great way to do it.
I think one thing I would add is that the terms mentor and mentee can be fairly weighted, right? There's like responsibility on both sides. But if you think about it more from a relationship perspective of connection, like learning, support, that kind of stuff, and not as a mentor and mentee, you may actually find that you already have people in your life for whom you are playing that role and you're playing that role for them. For example, before I got into the PR industry, I was in the entertainment industry, and in shows and casts, you always had something that you would call your pick one, which you were always on the road, you were always doing different shows, et cetera. And you knew there was probably only one person from this cast who you were really going to stay connected with over time. And in my career within the PR, there are probably 5 people over, my span of 25 years or so now, that I realize over that time, I've been working with them as either a mentor or mentee at all different ages. And I think that does happen naturally. And if you take a step back, you'll be much more aware of those relationships that are serving that role and where you may be serving that role. And that's also another interesting way to look at it, just from a connection and learning perspective, rather than, a role perspective, which I have found very helpful over the years.
So Muna, I want to jump in and tag you on this one. So in your role as ad fed, you're a recent grad, but you're also going to be helping current students. So how do you see the role of mentor or mentee in your position?
I mean, it's interesting because I recently graduated, so it's kind of working with, I would say people that you probably go to school with, which is really nice, I think, because you're still able to learn new things from them as well, because things are constantly changing. But when I think of people asking younger folks to be their mentor, I'm like, whoa, this is the first time I'm hearing it, and that's amazing. But as like you said, naturally you are a mentor to people around you, and as so are they for you. So it's really nice to kind of see it from both sides. Like, okay, so I get to have this in my life, close friends and family, and then I also am able to do this, where professionally I'm able to grow. Is really nice.
Thank you. So we've got a couple questions that have come in from the attendees. This one from Michelle is there anything you could do when you feel like you're the only one doing the majority of compensating for your boss's communication style? I've been in several situations where I feel I'm the only one adapting my communication style. At the end of the day, there's a power dynamic where the boss doesn't have to accommodate for another person's communication style. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you deal with being the only person who has to change your style to fit your boss? Alan, you're smiling there.
I'm so conflict averse, I'd probably let's hear what Alan has to say.
You don't want to hear what I have to say. No, it's real. Trust me, it's real. But that's where it takes some courage, and you own your 50%, right? So you have to be equally invested in protecting what you need at work, because ultimately you want to succeed, and you also want your boss to succeed. Or, and we hate the word boss anyway. Let's, it's just like, it's so authoritarian, but you need to succeed as an organization, and everybody has their role to play. And just because you're reporting into someone, that's just the way the roles are playing out. So you have to be willing to have those conversations. And conversely, somebody in a directorial role needs to be able to have the courage to have those same conversations with what they need. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's just the courage and the ability. And also you have to know that it may not go in your favor, but hey, you've spoken your mind, and that's what you want to do. You've spoken your truth, because if you don't, it's going to get caught down here. And, now we're getting metaphysical, but always, go for that, and know that you're doing the right thing for you, because it is your career and it's your career path, and you need to earn what you need to earn as well. So it's that ownership factor.
Any suggestions on how to start the conversation, Katie or Jill?
Well, I would say that depends on what your office, your environment is. You know, is it an open environment where you have 360 feedback, that you give feedback to the people that you report to and they give feedback to you? I personally can only look at it from my own perspective, and I've had people that were my direct reports give me advice on how to communicate with other people, and it was great. And I took it to heart and changed my style and moved on. But then my top strength in Strength Finders is learner, and I'm all about that. So when you're open to it, it's easier, but it just depends on the culture and the place of where you work. Because if you have a very open environment where everyone gives everybody feedback all the time because it's all about doing the great work and moving forward, that makes it easy. When it's not so open and things are more structured, then you have to do these things delicately.
Yeah, and I mean, at our office, we say a lot, start by starting. And I think sometimes it can become this huge thing in your head that you're kind of ruminating on, and it, gains so much weight in your mind when, just starting by, having that, being vulnerable in the way that, to your point, works within your work environment. But start by starting, because the alternative is that, either you're unhappy in your job or you leave. And, if that's a company you really want to be at, you really have nothing to lose, in terms of, letting people know your boundaries and your styles.
Thank you. So that question is, how do you think the pandemic has impacted intergenerational communications? Rachel, I'll give that one to
I
you
was gonna
first.
say, I only worked for a few years before the pandemic, and then pandemic and now. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just how reachable you are. Like, especially if you're working from home, like, does closing your laptop at 5 truly mean you're done working? At least not for me, no, because then I'm gonna go and cook dinner and my phone will like blow up with stuff and I'll come sit back down at my desk, that is the beauty of working in office, like back when you literally had to be butts and seats 8 to 5, is like when you close your computer, you're done. Like, don't contact me. And even maybe it's not as much as at an agency, since we serve our clients and their needs are around the clock potentially, but it's just the how reachable part you are. And I've tried to get better at not responding. Like, it can be so easy to respond right away because you know what you want to say. And letting things, I'll let messages sit for a while, especially if it's after hours or like over the weekend. Like, I'll get back to you. Even people in my personal life, it's like your phone and your computer and the dinging of notifications can make it seem like it's so instantaneous, but I try to let them simmer. I guess that's the biggest change. It's just how much you're expected to be reachable in a moment's notice. And that can be really harmful to mental health.
I know that we had an earlier discussion about how much stress and anxiety some of this constant communication causes individuals, and also how the anxiety we hear about from millennials and Gen Zs is real, and that we need to respect that and not think that it's something that's just always been there.
I think,
Yeah.
that's where my head was going. And Katie, you brought up something earlier about, start by starting, but also how it gets so big before you even get there. And that made me think about the anxiety levels within our younger generations and the constant access and the constant assault of technology, I think has impacted that, but I also think that it impacted older generations, the Gen Zers and the Gen Xers and the boomers, in forcing us to embrace technology we might not have before, and forcing us to be good at it. And I think that opened lines of communication and an understanding of the preferred means of communications of younger generations. And so now we're all equally savvy at it, and we've had to force it, so I think that's a positive impact of it. But I think also, I can't imagine. I just can't. I wasn't raised with my hands full of technology, right?
Mhm.
And so that's a very different world for me, and I have to understand what that feels like. I'm not a doom scroller. Sorry, that's not who I am. So it's just a very different way of thinking. So I think there have been positive impacts if we use them wisely. And I think that, but that as you were talking about, Rachel, that the negative impacts of that constant assault. And I think that's where we always talked about that positive intent and leading with compassion and grace. It really takes a lot of that, and that's not easy. So I think that right now, I think it's a 50-50 split, Eva, you know what I mean, from a positive and negative impact perspective.
Okay.
I think if I could continue on that one for just a second, I think it's made us adapt our styles. Like, I force myself to use delayed send in Teams and in Outlook. And like Rachel was talking about getting sucked back into the office. I travel a bunch. I end up in a hotel. I end up working at 10 o'clock at night. I force myself to use delayed send so I'm not messing up someone else's sleep to communicate something to get it out of my head. But the other aspect of it, I think that's been interesting, is I'm a remote worker. I'm in the office today, but that's pretty rare. It made us much more aware of what 100% remote workers go through, made us much more communicative of mental health benefits and things like that, to recognize how overwhelming and how alone it can be when you are in your home, right? Or you're working out of your car, or you're working in a remote situation, because we all had to feel it at one point in time. It made us a lot more aware of that. And even on Zoom, it made us ask questions of the people that are on there to make sure everyone's participating. It's just
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, I love that insight.
Is there any questions that anyone wants to ask from the audience, just the panelists? If not, I'll skip to my ad lib questions I have. So it's going to be a speed round for the panelists. What are the 2 tips you want to share with the group about how to improve communication, whether it be just general communication or communication intergenerationally? And I'll start with Rachel.
Oh gosh. I'd say the setting boundaries to start. We've talked about it this whole meeting, but I wanted to, it can be hard as a younger person on the team to come in and like kind of make demands, or to what our generation, it feels bossy. And like, I don't feel like I'm that established in my career to where I can be like, Alan, don't text me after 5, because then it's like, oh no, I might get in trouble.
I might just do it because it's obnoxious. So just to get back at you. So yeah.
Yeah. That's probably the hardest for me. It's just having the courage to ask for what you need and be your own advocate to start. And then the other thing would be having empathy. We talked about it earlier, like everyone in your life, all your colleagues, or someone's getting married or having a kid, or they're not doing those things and they're traveling, and it can be hard, or it can be easy to be judgmental of other people's scenarios, especially in like the hybrid scenario where you never see them in person or on the phone or whatever it is. But you have no idea what's going on in other people's lives. So advocate for yourselves and have empathy for other people's situations. We're all just doing our best. And I don't think anyone here is a communications department for like heart surgeons or rocket scientists. So at the end of the day, we'll all be fine.
Thank you. Katie, same question.
Yes. I mean, I would say just being super open and, wanting to learn about other perspectives, and, in hearing that, it's not, negating your own perspective or saying it's wrong. It's learning about others. I think, especially in our industry, that only helps us craft messaging that's resonant with, people beyond ourselves and our echo chamber. No one wants to, work in an echo chamber. So I think having that openness and, really being a sponge for learning about others and applying that to your work. And then of course, also your inter-team relationships as well.
Jill, same question.
Oh, well, Leah put one of the tips in the chat about how to delay messages in Microsoft Teams, and it's pretty easy to do it in Outlook as well. But like, that's one of my biggest tips, because when I'm working doesn't mean you need to work. And just like Rachel mentioned, you know, it's tough for younger people to ask what's in bounds and what's not. It's easy for a team to set boundaries for themselves and say, we're not going to communicate outside 7 and 7. You know, and if the team sets those rules, then it's a little safer for everyone involved. So, you know, I would just say, be a learner, start with an open heart, and remember, trust and respect. You know, if we just assume positive intent, we'll all be better off in the end.
Okay. So Muna, how about you? Your tips.
Those are all really great tips. I think 2 tips that I would share would be definitely having that trust and respect. I think wherever you go, you need that for sure. Educate yourself, educate others. I think at the end of the day, like I keep going back to that, like you need to be able to keep that going. If you don't know, there's someone out there that knows that can help you. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And still being able to come from I would say a place of owning it and a place of wanting it. I think so. If you don't want it, this might not be for you.
Thank you. Alan?
Wow, there's been so much said. I feel like from a leadership perspective, lead with compassion, lead with grace, and lead with humor. But then from a contribution perspective, the same thing. Contribute with compassion, contribute with grace, and contribute with humor. I think that really helps level set everything and keeps us all real. And also remember, there's always somebody smarter in the room, and there should be, and there's always somebody who can do it better than you, and they should be able to do it better than you. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. And opening yourself up to that and always being aware of that is hugely helpful.
Thank you. So one last call for anyone who wants to jump online and ask a question. You're welcome to come on as you would like. Otherwise, we can end this early. Oh, here's maybe a question here. Okay, so I think I'm just going to read out this comment. It's about soft personal skills like empathy go a long way to building bridges. If importance of intergen dynamics needs to be emphasizing, perhaps raise consciousness by linking behavior to business success. Understanding psychology is a safety is a main ingredient to success. So I appreciate that comment on the chat from Sheila. But yes, Leah, please jump in. I think I can.
I just have an anecdote I could share. So I'm not going to name any names, but I had a client that I had like emailed a couple times. I texted him, no response, and I was getting really frustrated. And I was trying to coordinate a meeting that this partner had requested. And so I finally just told the partner, like, you know what, I've tried, I can't push it anymore, right? Like I have now spent my capital with this client, and you're welcome to reach out to him directly. But I got together with him in person for lunch, and I didn't call him out on this thing, but through the conversation we had over lunch, I was able to kind of read between the lines and figure out why he was not responding to this particular request. So it just kind of goes back. Oh, and Marcia has a question, so I'll toss it to Marcia when I'm done with my story. But I think it just goes back to that assume positive intent, right? and I was getting irritated because I felt like I was being ghosted, and I felt like that was not respectful, which is something I value. And I realized, like, you're the client, I'm the agency. You're a man, I'm a woman. Like, all of that factored into it for me. But at the end of the day, like, I want to be treated with respect. And thankfully, through this in-person meeting, through a live conversation, I was able to figure out what was going on. So that's my like +1 for like sometimes live conversations and getting together in person can have value. So that's my story. And now I'll be quiet and I'll let Marcia ask her question.
Good morning, everyone. Eva, thank you for assembling this wonderful panel. I'm sorry I'm late. I had a last minute client meeting, and not sure if this was addressed earlier, but my question to the panel, with workplace culture changing with buyouts and layoffs and shifting responsibilities and staff having to assume more work. I heard earlier when I came on talking about mental health, those emails that go out, and one can be reticent to address, well, I'm not able to do this, or I'm feeling overwhelmed. Was there anything said, or was this discussed at all? Because even though the economy is improving, there are still layoffs that are occurring. And there are people who are taking on more responsibilities, and that can fall upon those who are in the younger age demographic, and they may not know or have the tools or skills to how to speak up and say something, or be afraid because they don't want their job to go away either.
This exact scenario happened to me this week, and I'll say, actually, I leaned on my talent, my supervisor is a millennial. I've been working a lot lately, a lot of hours, on things that need to get done for a client. And I just kind of, I'll say yes to pretty much, or not yes, but let me go and check. And then I take this back to my manager and I'm like, these are all the things I got to do, like by end of day tomorrow. And she'll be like, no, we're not doing that. This is why. Here's some like supporting points that you can use for either extending the timeline or rationale for why you can't create whatever it is in a day's time, kind of support. So leaning on your team members that you do have to try and divvy up work, or like in that scenario, I said earlier, I'm like generally kind of conflict averse. I just depends on the scenario. I don't typically like it. So relying on your team to help support you in those areas, but have been feeling everything you described.
And I think it's also, like you said, you brought a list of kind of all the things you were working on. I think it can be hard for a manager to, they're probably aware that you're really busy and you've been on email a lot and you have a lot of projects, but maybe they're not as familiar with the amount of work that you have to do, especially if you're working on multiple teams. So I think communicating that, but then also coming with some recommended solutions of like, okay, here's a deadline that is really freaking me out. I have this PTO. I don't, want to be working on my PTO. This is a particular project that now, could I get some help with? Could so-and-so be a great partner for this? I think bringing solutions to potential solutions can inspire like what feels like more collaboration on divvying up workload.
Mm-hmm. I think that's sometimes easier in an agency environment than it is in a corporate setting. I've, been on both sides of the road so many times that I've made tracks in between. But I think as a manager, I use this analogy with younger people. Your work life sometimes is like a very crappy paper plate. You can only put so much stuff on it before things start to spill out, right? So if we're going to add to that and things have to go on there, what comes off? Because there's only so much of you to go around. And I think, Marcia, that's conversations we need to have, because in corporate life, that happens all the time. I'm about to do it to my colleagues here because I'm leaving Land O'Lakes and going into teaching. So I've spent the last, I don't know how many weeks, writing up how to do something and passing that task off to someone. But every one of those people went through there's only so much of me to go around. So if I'm going to take on this piece of work that Jill was doing, what comes off the plate? So we need to have those conversations, and we need to be advocates for other people's mental health. And I think that that yes, younger people feel that pressure, but I think that goes all the way across the generations. We all feel that pressure, and we need to have that conversation with our team, with our manager, and say, okay, great, yes to this, because it's more important, but of the rest of the things, what comes off the plate? There's always something that if we didn't do it, no one would miss it, but we have to prioritize to get there.
One of the things that I learned early in my career was that if it's okay to say no, but then you need to have a reason behind saying no. But if you say yes and you don't get it done, there will be worse ramifications than if you say, no, I don't have time right now. Let's figure out a solution. So it's kind of weighing the risk as well. And it's hard to learn to say no, but it's always it's kind of like improv. It's not yes and, it's no and let's do it this way. That's what the options there. And one of the things that I learned early on was never come to your boss with a problem. Come to your boss with a problem and possible solutions. And that's important to always learn.
I also think conversely, I know we're wrapping up. When we talked about, Marcia, a lot of this revolving around assuming positive intent, no matter where you are in the cycle, of that team as a leader or as, a junior member of the team. And also know that in these cases where, layoffs are horrific and we're all feeling that, assume positive intent that leadership wants to hear from you. We all know what it's like. We've all been through it at some point in our career, and we all go through it at some point in our career. So being able to keep those lines of communication open and not being fearful of saying, okay, well, what happens next? How do we address this together? And I think that's really, really important, because as a leader, we can't address something we don't hear. Right. And so that we can't help prioritize or help shift things or get you 3 more paper plates, Jill, to shore that up if we don't know where things are. But chances are, your leaders are very much aware, and maybe just asking the right questions helps them also know how you're feeling about it. So we talked about that courage, Rachel, and, kind of, yeah, you do own that 50%. So you're absolutely open to it, right? It's your career path as well. And I think that gets back to everybody being willing to be vulnerable. Leaders have to be vulnerable too, and every member of the team has to be vulnerable. And that's when some of the best communication happens, and we figure it out and we work it out.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for your time today. This has been really delightful, and I appreciate it. There'll be a recording of this if you want to look at it later, listen to it later on the Minnesota PRSA website. But have a great rest of the summer, everyone. Thank you.